Out of your hair. Encourage you to move towards the front of the room. We have lots of seats up here. So welcome. Good morning. My name is Brad. I'm the Executive Director of the Big Sky Chamber of Commerce. This is our annual event on eggs and issues. As you can see in the back, there are eggs. And here on the screen, we will still have issues for you to go into. But this is an annual event where we have an opportunity to take a topic and kind of do a deep dive in how it affects the community, how it affects the residents here in Big Sky, and what are the impacts of Big Sky on the rest of the region and the state that we live in. So today we have a great treat. We have a fantastic speaker. You may have seen her before, but Jackie Haines, who is now an employee of the Resort Tax of the Big Sky Resort Tax Area District, formerly Executive Director of the Northern Rockies Development District. Sorry, I couldn't even NERMED. As former Executive Director, we were lucky enough for Big Sky to actually hire her away and bring her in. So now we have our own economist telling us data about Big Sky in general. And I think today is a great example of how Jackie's been able to do the chamber in collaboration with Resort Tax. There's a fantastic study in front of you today, and this is actually the debut of this data, known as the EIA, or what we call Economic Impact Analysis. And Jackie's going to walk you through that over the next 45 minutes. We'll have lots of questions at the end. So thank you so much for attending. Thanks for enjoying the breakfast. And I should mention our breakfast sponsors who support the chamber are your sponsors of breakfast this morning. So we thank them for their generosity of the breakfast. So Jackie, thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And if you are not caffeinated yet, grab a cup because we're going to dive into data. So we're going to be having a lot of fun this morning. Some of you may have heard me talk before. If you haven't, my background, a little bit about me, my background is in economics. I specialize in labor economics. My master's thesis was looking at equal pay laws. And so I have been doing economic development for about 10 years in the region. My former position, I worked across Park, Gallatin, and Madison counties. So I've been around for quite a long time and have experienced the crazy growth that we will be actually talking about today. So this morning, I'm going to talk to you about the economic impact analysis. It was originally a study commissioned by the Chamber and the Resort Tax District, and they hired Northern Rocky Mountain Economic Development District to do that study. Since then, I've moved over, as Brad mentioned, to work for the Resort Tax District, and so I'm going to be presenting on it today. Let's see, on to the next. So we're just going to dive in. Sorry, I'm getting the clicker working here. We're going to dive in and with the heady hitter, talking about Big Sky's economic impact. But let me first start talking to you about how we think about economic impact. There's layers to it. So the first layer is your direct spending, right? You have your dollar and you go spend it. That is the direct piece. In the study, we looked at 3 different buckets of direct spending. We looked at resident spending, tourism spending, and then private construction spending. So it's really important to note that the construction spending in here does not include public, so government construction spending. So it's not a total that includes like the Tiger Grant and the roads improvements that you see. Now, once you go spend that dollar, then what that does is it circulates in the community. So you have something that we call indirect or induced impact. So the indirect impact is when a company goes and buys lumber from Kenyon Noble, Kenyon Noble then has to order more lumber. And because they have to order more lumber, they have to hire a new employee to manage the extra demand for that lumber. And so that's your indirect impact, right? So that direct spending creates additional magnitude of impact. Then you have your induced impact. So once that Kenyon Noble lumber manager then goes to Town and Country and spends his dollar at Town and Country, that creates additional demand for those other goods. So you have this then additional induced impact. And so as the dollar circulates within your community, $1 spent actually generates more additional economic impact. And we're going to talk about the quantifying of those numbers in a second. But in this study, we looked at the direct impact on our 2-county area, Gallatin and Madison counties, and then the direct impact on the state. And so we're able to calculate some of those impacts by industry, what stays locally and what leaks out to the rest of the state. The data that we used is resort tax collections. We use that to look at tourism spending. As many of you know, resort tax is just on luxury goods. So that can account for the tourism impact. We looked at personal consumption expenditures and used a cost of living multiplier to adjust that for Big Sky. And then we looked at private construction expenditures, which I already mentioned. So on to the numbers. We're going to camp on this next slide here for a minute because there's a lot to intake in. First, I just want to mention, if we look at resident benefits, our estimate is that $257 million is direct spending by residents throughout the year. The indirect impact of that is an addition. It creates an additional $116 million for a total gross impact of $374 million. So that total gross impact does not stay all locally, right? Some of that leaks out to the rest of the state or other economies. And we can estimate that what stays locally is $216 million. And all of that economic activity impacts 4,000 jobs. And so then we can move on to visitor spending and see that direct spending is $487 million. That is just industries that are tracked through BizRad. That creates an additional indirect impact of $217 million for a total gross impact of $705 million. What stays locally again is $422 million, and that touches about 8,700 jobs. And then construction spending direct spending is $772 million with an additional impact of $427 million. Total gross impact is $1.1 billion. And then $630 million of that stays locally, and that touches about 13,000 jobs, it's estimated. So when all of those add up together, we have a massive economic impact of Big Sky to the region. Direct spending is $1.5 million with an additional $759 million impact for a total of $2.27 billion on our global economy. Locally, what stays is $1.269 million for employment benefits of 26,000. Now, this is a cool little stat that you can burn into your brain. Those jobs, when you add up the 2-county labor force, that is about 1 in 3 jobs in the 2-county labor force that the economic impact of Big Sky touches. That's outrageous, right? When you think about how small this community is, for it to touch 1 in 3 jobs in the 2-county area, we're going to come back to that number because it's super important as we think about how we're investing in Big Sky and how we're protecting the economy of Big Sky, because it impacts all the jobs in the region. The other thing I want to note is we have heard some different arguments about how, so much construction is happening in Big Sky, and when construction dies off because Big Sky is built out, then what? Big Sky won't have as much of an economic impact. Well, I want to make a few notes about that because construction spending, yes, that's the short-term benefit, but the long-term benefit is that it's actually increasing property tax values, which have a long-term benefit to the public governments. And so that's the investment in the improvement of the land and the buildings. And that's really important because that long-term benefit does stay. That value is held by the property. And we're also going to return to that. How do we protect property tax values for the sake of the whole region and the state? And then the other thing I want to mention about that private construction spending is that it isn't just contained within the small community Big Sky. We do see it spreading into other communities and other communities benefiting from it, as you can see by the investment in Gateway and how much Gateway has developed over the last several years. And then the other thing that I want to note is 50% of the impact does come from residents and tourism. And so that's also really important to think about. Later in the presentation, I'm going to talk about the size of the tourism industry in this community. And so we want to be thinking about, if that's the main economic driver, how are we protecting that, right? How are we bolstering it? And how are we ensuring that can continue to, we can continue to benefit from that year over year? So this is just a nice summary slide if you want to take a shot of it. This is just kind of summarizing all the things that I just said to you. 1 in 3 jobs in the labor force. And the state of Montana receives an additional $1 billion of economic impact. So for every dollar that's spent in Big Sky, it equates to $2.50 of total economic activity. Now we can take this economic impact and compare it to GDP. So what stays locally is basically the equivalent of a county GDP level. And so the local impact that you saw on the last slide is there on the top, the all private industry, the 1.2 million. And if you add up the two GDPs of the two counties, you can see that actually Big Sky's impact is 14% of the two countywide GDP, which is really astounding for such a small community. And then when you look at the global impact of Big Sky, it equates to 4.3% of statewide GDP, which is just, it boggles my mind how much that is such a big impact on the state for such a small community and such a small region. Okay, so small communities, small workforce is producing these huge economic benefits. This is new data. You may not have seen it. This is actually from BizRad business registration in 2023. So BizRad just released their 2024 business registration. So if you see that, don't get confused. This is actually a year old because we were working on the study for a while now. In 2023, BizRad had 810 businesses registered with it. The resort tax is, if you work within the resort tax district, you're legally required as a business to register. And the resort tax has been able to add some questions onto that registration, which gives us really unique data about Big Sky that we don't typically have in publicly available data. So when a business registers, all those 810 businesses have reported having about 15,000 employees total, and they estimate that about half of them, 7,400, are working within the resort tax district boundary. They report to us that 4,300 of those are seasonal, so we can tell it's a very large seasonal workforce. That's an important stat actually because publicly available data doesn't give us that seasonal workforce for Big Sky. And so this is the first time we've been able to actually quantify and kind of wrap our arms around some of that, which then leaves us about 3,000 that are working year round. Now, it is important to note that this data doesn't account for if someone is working 2 jobs within Big Sky businesses, and it's not accounting for a full-time worker versus a part-time worker. This is just giving you number of employees, but it still gives us a nice picture. And this is, if you're a business in this room, that's why this registration data is really important because we get to say really cool things with it once we compile it. So the other thing that we know from publicly available data is that about 75% of the Big Sky workforce commutes in. And so we started to wonder, where do they come from and how are these employees distributed? We can't get at that through kind of traditional forms of data. And so what we did is we requested from all the private businesses just the employee zip codes. Well, of their permanent addresses, just the zip codes. So don't worry, I don't know where you live. I don't even know your name. I just know your zip code. And we're able to put it on a heat map. And so this heat map does give us an idea of how the workforce is then distributed throughout the community. We can see of the employees that we were able to capture in this data set, 90% of them live in Gallatin County, and only 3% live in Madison. And so this is very, very important to understand because while we know that the 191 corridor is important and it all impacts our lives every day, we need to be talking about the 191 corridor and how to upkeep it because so many people's livelihoods depends on their ability to get to work and access Big Sky. And so that just helps to support that argument that this 191 corridor is very, very important that we continue to talk about and continue to make sure that it's accessible to all of us. Okay, so now we're going to move on to lodging tax. We won't spend much time on this slide, but the slide is interesting and there's a few points that I want to make to it. So the first thing you'll see, there's 4 lines on here. This is Big Sky lodging tax collections Bozeman lodging tax. The yellow line is Yellowstone Country, which is a tourism district, and that's the tourism region that we're part of. And then that top line is the statewide collections. Some things to note are that lodging tax collections have gone up over time, with the exception of 2020, as we all know. And then the other thing that's interesting is in 2018, Big Sky collected as much lodging tax as Bozeman, right about there. And since then, Big Sky has actually been collecting more lodging tax than Bozeman and contributing more to that. And so that's important too, because when you think about how small the community is compared to the size of Bozeman, we do a lot and collect a lot based on the workforce and the available rooms. And so this next slide here is a nice summary of lodging tax. Big Sky only has 6 hotels, so a lot of it is short-term rentals. The average nightly rate is higher, so lodging tax is an 8% on the rate, right? So rates matter in terms of how much you're collecting. But Big Sky is still the largest collector of lodging tax in the state. They account for about a third of the Yellowstone, the districts, the tourism district's lodging tax collections. And they account for 12% of the statewide lodging tax collections, and the lodging tax has grown 213% since 2017. So it really, I know that looks like a sloping line when you compare it to the state collections, but it's actually a very drastic line when you have the proportions on the graph correct. And then we're going to move on to resort tax here. So let me take this water. So as many of you know, resort tax collects 4% on luxury goods. 1% is allocated for infrastructure, and 3% goes to general collections. In FY23, BizRad collected $15 million in general collections and $5 million for infrastructure. General collections, then your FY23 collections then are reallocated to the community in FY24, and you can see how these are allocated. So a large portion of the 3% allocations actually go towards government services, which in our language, we call that property tax offsets. So property tax owners and renters benefit from it alike. It offsets fees and rates, so it helps to offset your water rates, but it also then offsets mill levies and things like that go on your property taxes. So that's really important. The other thing that is unique to Big Sky is that they're able to do nonprofit grants. We think that that's really important, the work that nonprofits are doing within the community, and we want to make sure that that is ongoing and sustaining. The other thing that the resort tax does is we do have reserve allocations and then an opportunity fund that's available. Then infrastructure, the 1% towards infrastructure, as most of you probably know, it has gone towards supporting the water and sewer infrastructure development. That is almost to its conclusion. And so we're looking at how can we use the 1% in the future, and we're talking about potential renewal in the future. The other thing maybe you don't know is that the resort tax has the capacity to do bonding. And so we can bond a portion of the revenues, which is positive because as we talk about infrastructure, which we're going to get into much more here, it allows us to have greater financing capacity in support of the development of that infrastructure. And so to do that, we have to look at the 3%. Right now, the 3% is good until 2032. And to be able to bond with that, we're going to have to extend the horizon. So we're talking about what that looks like right now. And we're also talking about what is the bonding capacity that the resort tax district has. Okay, now we're going to go on to property taxes, which is like the boring, most interesting thing that I'm going to talk about today. So this is exciting. I am not going to proclaim myself as a property tax expert, but I have learned a whole heck of a lot while doing this. And let me explain this slide a little bit. So in our process, we looked at the property tax districts on the Madison County side and the property tax districts on the Gallatin County side. We added them together. Total from everyone living in Big Sky, $58 million in property taxes were collected in 2022. It's important to note it changes every year, but of that $58 million that was collected from both sides of the county, they went into 3 buckets. Some went to the state, some went to Madison County, and some went to Gallatin County. So those are the 3 colors that you see there. The smaller bubbles in here are then the breakdowns of those collections, right? So of the 58 million that was collected, 21 million of property taxes went to the state. And those are our school equalization levies. Some of them went to universities, most of it went to school equalization bills. Then 21 million went to Madison County, and that's distributed to a lot of different things. You know, we pay property taxes for roads and hospitals and schools, and so you can see that breakdown. The one thing that's common with property taxes across Madison and Gallatin County are the levies that go to the Big Sky Fire District. And so that's the bubble that you see that crosses the two. Together, in 2022, the Big Sky Fire District received 1.7 million from both sides, from the 2 counties. And then on the Gallatin County side, there's a lot more that goes to Big Sky services, like Big Sky K through 12 collects taxes on that side, where if you're in Madison County, you don't pay taxes to Big Sky K through 12. So on the next slide, we're going to break it down by county here. We're going to start with Gallatin County. This is very high level buckets. Again, you can see the proportion of the levies that go to Big Sky, that go to general county usage, and then that go to the state. And then you can see here how those Big Sky levies break down, right? So we have the K through 12, we have the fire district, we have Big Sky zoning, some of your property taxes go to Big Sky water sewer. 43%, I like this pie graph, 43% of your property taxes go directly to Big Sky services. 34% goes to just general county services, some that you'll use, some that you might use less, and then 23% goes to the state equalization levies. Now we'll move on to the Madison County side. In Madison County, only 6% of the property taxes go directly to Big Sky services. So that's the Big Sky Fire District. You'll see. Then 18 million go to the general county levies. So that's the Ennis School District, the hospital district, and other things like that. And then the state, the way that percentage works out, those state mills are a lot higher. So all this growth, all this economic capacity that we are talking about, we have leaned into a resource that was produced by Headwaters Economics last year. It was a report called The Amenity Trap. What do you do when you have these high tourism dominated communities with lots of growth? And we can see that Big Sky has lots of growth. You don't believe me quite yet? Look at these population numbers. We were able to have the Montana Department of Commerce create a special GIS boundary for the BizRad district. So this is actually new data too, to be able to see the population within the resort tax district. And we can break it out by the counties. We can see that in 10 years, the community grew 54%. And everyone is freaking out about Bozeman's growth and Gallatin County's growth, but actually Big Sky has grown a lot more. And I would even argue that the 32% that you can see Gallatin County grew was actually a portion of Big Sky's growth. Economists tend to say that sustainable growth is 1% year over year. You can kind of get into an argument with nerds if you want to talk about that. But this demonstrates, I think, how important it is that we are talking about investing in infrastructure that supports the growth. Because if we can't drive on roads and we can't have water and sewer to our homes and we can't have homes, we're all going to lose our damn minds. And so this growth really speaks to that. Right below that, you can actually see then that growth is further enforced by data from the water sewer district. So that graph with just the upward trend is from 1990 to 2022. It's the wastewater plant inflow data, but their connections graph actually looks very much similar. Their connections graph over that same time period shows a growth of, let's see, I memorized it earlier, Johnny, 4.5% growth year over year since 1990. So that is just straight upward trajectory growth. And that's why the next part of this presentation, we're going to spend time talking about infrastructure and the important things that support that growth and how do we protect the economic activity. So We at Resort Tax District have leaned into the amenity track report and have really thought about the recommendations that they have put forth in that report. And this is a nice little infographic from that report. I want to talk through some of these points today because we are really thinking a lot about how to build the healthiest community that we possibly can with the most economic vibrancy. And so it starts with housing. You can see we all talk about housing all day, every day, at least I do. And so I'm not going to talk a lot about housing today. The Big Sky Community Housing Trust is an amazing resource to this community. I would argue that they are one of the leaders in the state in the work that they're doing innovative and cutting edge things to help to try to solve that problem. They did just update their housing action plan. So if you're interested, please take a look at that. The other thing I won't talk much more about today is the resort tax. So the resort tax bill, I want everyone to understand it's a really important resource to the community. And the reason that resource is important is because none of the tax revenues go to the state. Almost every other tax that you pay goes to the state and then comes back. This resource stays locally, and you have all the ability to have your voice heard and input into the process of how those tax dollars are used. So you don't have to drive to Helena to give feedback on how you want these dollars to be invested in your community. You can come to a resort tax meeting once a month and have your voice heard. And the flexibility of how those tax dollars are used is so important. We do not have other resources within our state that are as flexible and more malleable to the community needs as Resort Tax District. So it's really important that we protect this flexibility and this local resource. And just to note too, because it ties into these other things, BizRat does have $2.5 million in emergency reserves allocated. They were able to respond to the COVID because of that and implement a lot of different things, a lot of different resources that other communities didn't have. The two things we will talk about today are infrastructure and natural disasters. As I mentioned, infrastructure is very, very important. We're going to talk a lot more about that, but it's important to support growth. And then we're going to touch some on natural disasters as I go through the next slides. There's a few different resources that I've leaned on to talk about this. We've used the Big Sky Wildfire Action Guide and then Fire Adapted Big Sky Wildfire Hub, which you'll see some screenshots of. And then we're also going to talk about severe drought, and we'll hear a little bit more about that from Commissioner Boyer in our Joint County Commission meeting, because as we know, maybe not severe drought, but drought has impacted our winter season. So we're going to talk some about this too. First into wildfire. This was shocking to me when I'm not going to profess to know, be an expert on natural disaster, but when I accessed this resource and saw that Big Sky has a higher wildfire risk than 93% of the communities in the US, that is outrageous. So I think that is very, very important that we're talking about wildfire and how to protect against it. One thing that we can look at those that have gone before us. So when you look at like the Camp Fire in Paradise, California, that community years later still has not recovered. So that community, just some fun stats, 26,000 people lived in that community before the fire. 5 years later, only 8,000 people were living in that community. It took them 9 months to just clean up debris fields. And so when we think about a devastating forest fire, those impacts are almost forever and very long run. And the thing, in my previous role, I spent a lot of time working in Park County and recovering from the flood. And the one thing that I learned is that actually the way to save money in natural disasters is to spend it in protecting against them. And so it's very important that we're talking about this, because if 1 in 3 jobs touches the Big Sky economic activity, what happens if, right? We don't want it to devastate the 2 county area. So one thing that we do have an amazing resource is in our fire district. The Big Sky Fire District is thinking about these things and is working about on these things. So I want to give them kudos. They're in the audience today, so you can talk to them. A lot of what we can do is what they're working on. And so that is exciting news, but we're also thinking about how can we build support infrastructure to then further protect against wildfire. Okay, and the second thing I'm going to talk about is severe drought. This year we had a really low snowfall season, and I just want to play this video. Sometimes videos don't always go super well in presentations, but this video is a good example of how two different Montana communities that are ski resort based are navigating snowfall shortages.
As the last of the state's open ski reports wrapped up their winter run, workers reflected on the season's ups and downs. NBC Montana's Brianna Carroll shows us two ski areas who took different approaches to managing this year's snow.
The sky is wrapping up its longest season ever at 159 days. But as snowfall dipped approximately 60 inches below average, it wasn't without its challenges.
Earlier in the season, before Mother Nature really started cooperating, it was a little slower here, but in about mid-January, as soon as the weather started to turn, we really saw our visitation start to pick up a little bit.
As their 50th anniversary season draws to a close, Mesquite says there are a lot of people to thank for making it a success. And right at the top of that list is the resort snowmaking team.
Our snowmaking team and our mountain elk team has been incredible in making some lemonade out of lemons in a lower snow year.
Big Sky's state-of-the-art snowmaking technology allowed them to build a base depth that's holding on through the end of April, keeping skiers on the slopes longer. And infrastructure improvements, including the opening of the new Lone Peak Tram, helped increase overall visitation by bringing non-skiers up to the mountain too.
We saw more scenic riders this year, which was really great.
3 hours away in Neidhart, Showdown, Montana experienced a similar slow start to the winter season. Relying only on natural snow, they had to push back their opening dates, resulting in a shorter season than expected.
That definitely hurt, not being able to open that whole month of, pretty much the whole month of December.
Without snowmaking, Showdown took a different approach to keeping their trails covered, all thanks to their mountain operations team, which played a key role in making the season a success.
We had a great crew moving snow out of trees onto heavy traffic areas on our slopes. The snowcats did a lot of snow management.
Despite lower visitation and a late start to the season, when the snow did fall, Showdown saw skiers come out in droves, recording one of their busiest days on record in January. Still, the challenges posed by this winter have the team discussing whether snowmaking operations have a place in their future.
We definitely talked about and looked at adding snowmaking operations after this winter. It's quite a big investment and quite a long process, but after this season, it's definitely something that we're looking at.
Ultimately, Patrick said keeping skiing affordable is Showdown's main goal and something that will take precedent in the team's final decision on snowmaking. With warmer temperatures, both ski areas are already making preparations to kick off their summer programming, which will take them through to when the snow starts falling again next season. Reporting in Bozeman, Brianna Carroll, NBC Montana.
So that's just an example of what communities with and without infrastructure do and how important infrastructure is to protecting the tourism economy too. And so I'm going to move into infrastructure. Infrastructure is, the more that I do this work, the more passionate I get about infrastructure. It's arguably maybe the most boring thing that drastically impacts your life. And so I think that it's important that we're talking about it so we really understand how much it matters. And so the American Society of Civil Engineers does this really cool report. They go state by state and they grade our infrastructure. They gave Montana an infrastructure grade of a C. So we aren't doing super great. Their estimate is that our failing road infrastructure costs each of us $385 a year, and 46% of our roads are in mediocre condition. The EPA estimates that we'll need an additional $1.15 billion in funding for water infrastructure improvements. And each year we only invest about 160 to 170 million. So we really need to step up our investment in infrastructure. So if you talk to your state legislators, infrastructure. And you can go look up these reports. It's really interesting. But the question is, what is the cost to us of not investing in infrastructure? And so there's estimates. The experts say that underinvestment in infrastructure actually accumulates over time. So what it is today, if we don't invest in it, it gets bigger. The cost of that gets bigger. That is due to basically decreased trade, business underperformance, public safety impacts. It can create job losses and then lost income too. And so the estimate right now is that the average household loses about $63 a week on underinvestment in infrastructure. And then that is actually multiplied by your lost disposable income too. So that's that table there that you can see that the estimates of lost disposable income accumulates over time as that underinvestment accumulates also. And so the US Treasury estimates that $1 invested in infrastructure actually creates 150% economic output in 2 to 5 years. And then the UN estimates that $1 invested in climate resilient infrastructure saves us $6. And so infrastructure investment is important. I'm also thinking about that. And that's what we're starting to do at the Resort Tax District too. So in that vein, last year, the Resort Tax District hired Tischler Rice to update the capital improvement plan for Big Sky. It was an update to the 2010 report that was done. That 2010 report was not comprehensive. It didn't include the whole Resort Tax District boundaries. So this update does include that. This is just a summary table. If you want to find the full report online, it's on resorttaxdistrict.org, resorttax.org, sorry. Right now, what we're doing is we are going through and vetting the shovel readiness of these projects in these categories. And we're really working to understand the public financing mechanisms that are available to us outside of just using our resort tax revenues. And how do we create community-wide investment in infrastructure? So the reason that we want to invest in infrastructure is it can do a lot of things. It can protect jobs, right? That goes to the 1 in 3 jobs in the T County area. It can protect the tourism industry. As we saw, Showdown is now looking at investing in snowmaking. And we saw in that news report too that non-skiing riders, they have a specific word for it, riding the gondola also. So it brings in new business for the tourism industry. It can restore the watershed and enhance water quality. So restoring the watershed by making snow, we're creating a mechanism that's recharging the aquifer in a natural way that Mother Nature wants it to be recharged. And then enhancing water quality by supporting and improving our water and sewer district infrastructures. It can mitigate the impacts of natural disasters in many different ways. Again, snowmaking, it helps to recharge the aquifers and really, I think, mitigate against wildfire. Increase public safety with better roads and highways. We can increase that. We can also, your access via transportation, but it can also increase first responder response to you to respond to emergencies. We can protect wildlife through wildlife crossings. And then it supports livability too, so access to trails and then housing accessibility and affordability. And the reason we want to do this is in this report, you'll see we analyzed all the public revenue coming out of Big Sky. So not just property taxes. We looked at lodging tax, resort tax, we talked about this today, but income taxes, what liquor taxes we talked about in that report, gas tax, they're all in there. And together, Big Sky generates $144 million in annual public revenue. And that's what we want to be protecting, making sure that that constant revenue stream is there and stays healthy. So I'm happy to take questions. I know I hit you with a lot of numbers and a lot of data. And if you want to reach out to me after this, you're welcome to. So any questions, we'll dive right into it. Maybe not.
infrastructure needs over what timeline?
Gotta repeat that. Yeah, what is the timeline of the infrastructure needs? It depends on if we're looking at Big Sky or the state or the nation. But I would argue that's like a 20 to 30 year timeline with Montana's infrastructure. I think with Big Sky, we're working on getting a more specific number for that. And we are really targeting a lot of the infrastructure investment to be happening in the next 5 years. So it depends if you're talking about infrastructure investment versus like deterioration. All right, y'all need another cup of coffee. It looks like.
What, that capital investment plan, or what is needed, that $750 million, that's obviously a daunting number. Do y'all see that as at all achievable, and how do we get there?
Okay, so the question was that infrastructure improvement plan, and maybe you go back to that table, Jenny. That's $750 million. Do we see that as daunting and achievable, or how do we get there? Great question. It is a daunting number, but right now what we're doing is we're vetting a lot of those projects and getting a timeline to them, right? So there's some of that has to happen tomorrow, and then there's some of that can actually it have a little bit more of a life to it. And so we are vetting the shovel readiness of those, the actual cost of those right now, and putting together a package that we think we can tackle. And we're going to be talking about that more in the next year or so, year and a half. A lot of what we're looking at is how do we use additional public financing mechanisms other than just resort tax, because to achieve some of those infrastructure investments, we have to be stacking financing mechanisms. And that's why we're going to be talking about bonding more. We're going to be talking about taxing districts more. What mechanisms does the state allow for us to use and tap into? And that's really that's sort of the depth of, we're starting that discussion.
Jackie, that's a really difficult issue, and it's so multi-comprehensive. There are huge challenges. The biggest, when we look at the biggest areas for potential funding, it's obvious. I mean, it's governmental. It's not the Big Sky Resort area tax. That's a drop in the bucket, right? I mean, and can you address some of the potential areas and the entities that you'd be looking at for this huge shortfall that we're looking at?
Yeah, so my brain went 5 different directions, so I'm collecting or organizing my response here. One of the most important things that resort tax will allow us to do is have private match dollars for state and federal grants that are available. And so if you don't live in the land of nonprofits, let me try to unpack that a little bit. Right now, the federal government has an infrastructure package in front of us. They're funding a lot of these different types of projects, from transportation to manufacturing and things like that. So we're able to tap into the infrastructure package dollars. And a lot of times when you apply to a grant, they say, hey, we'll give you 50% of your project, but you have to find 50%. That's what they call match dollars. And so we can use the resort tax money as match for a lot of these resources. When we look at infrastructure, some of the top pieces of infrastructure that are on our minds and our list is transportation, water, sewer, and we can kind of break it down more, but I don't want to go over time. But we can use the federal infrastructure dollar grants. The state has some resources available for roads and bridges and water and sewer. It's not a ton. But again, together with the state and the local dollars, then it allows us to unlock federal dollars in more ways than other communities have available to them. Some rural communities that don't have those, our tax dollars, have a much harder time getting local match for those grants. And that match is really important because it allows you to be more competitive, especially when you go to the federal dollars. So there's those. There's also special taxing districts that we're looking at, like you may all be following the wellness district conversation. That's another mechanism of how we're looking at things. And so we are really doing a lot of research into how to maximize all the tools that we have on the table to us. Does that answer your question?
To that, to what extent does the fact that we're not a municipality limit?
To what extent does the fact that we're not a municipality limit access to some of that federal and state funding?
That's a great question. I'll take a stab at it. However, just to note, we will talk at the Joint County Commission. We are going to be talking about the recent incorporation study that the Resort Tax Commission, and that's going to be ongoing for the next year. And so that study followed that because my answer is going to be incomplete and will likely add to some of that. To answer your question directly, to some extent, it doesn't limit that, right? Like it depends on, it can really vary grant to grant. And so it depends on what the grant allows as an eligible applicant. Some eligible applicants to the state are actually water sewer districts. Right? So a water sewer district doesn't need a city or county to apply for them, and they can go get those monies directly. Same with the transportation district, and so on and so forth. There are some grants that then you need an incorporated municipality to apply, but those are actually fewer and far between because most of the grants do allow for like a nonprofit or a taxing district with some authority to apply to grants. So I actually, in my 10 years of grant work, I don't believe that is going to be an extensive limitation. And one of my favorite things about the Big Sky community actually is how collaborative and creative the community is in working together to solve some of those issues. And I think that the lack of incorporation encourages and supports and promotes that creativity and collaboration. And so I think that kind of answers, but it hard and fast, it depends on what the grant allows as the applicant. No property tax questions. I am shocked, y'all. Okay, I think I've almost used the hour. We return a few, no more questions. One last chance.
And you'll be here all morning,
I'll
correct?
be here all morning.
All right, so we can walk up to you. Just on timing right now though, so we have about a 30-minute break and then we do start our Joint County Commission meeting right around 10 o'clock right here in club. So please don't walk away, go grab a cup of coffee, then come back to your seat and we'll have the second half of the morning. Thank you.